Okay, so I think it's time to start. Welcome to the fifth ICC seminar in the Alan Turing centenary series that we are holding here at the university. Today's topic is, as you can see, related to Alan Turing's contribution to the birth of artificial intelligence. So Alan Turing, from the very early stage, in fact, when he was already at Sherborne College, so he was a high school student, started taking a very deep interest in the mind. So how is it that the mind can evolve and we can actually start thinking, whatever that may mean? And coupled with this growing interest in computational processes, this led him to basically the foundations of what today are called artificial intelligence, and to the big questions: can machine think, and how can we actually, discover or scientifically whether machines can think, whatever that may mean. Today's seminar is a double bill. We'll start with Yngvi, who's giving us the first part of the presentation. Then Kristinn will take over and will discuss in particular the so-called Turing Test. The speakers asked me to take questions right at the end. So whether you have questions for Yngvi or for Kristinn, so there will be handover at a certain point in the talk, and all the questions will take place at the end. Okay, so Yngvi.
Thank you, Luca. Yes, hello. My name is Yngvi Björnsson. I'm an associate professor here at the School of Computer Science at Reykjavik University, as well as a member of CADIA, which is the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Reykjavik University. So, as Luca mentioned, this talk is a part of a series that is actually going on worldwide in celebration of 100 years birth anniversary of Alan Turing. So he was born in 1912, and as you may know, was one of the founding fathers of computer science. So in our series, we've already talked about various contributions that he made to the field of computer science, including computability. Magnus Már gave a talk on cryptography. Yngvi gave a talk on that. Luca has already given a talk about his life. And Björnsson talked about his contributions to biology. And in today's talk, in today's talks, we are going to talk about his contributions to the field of artificial intelligence. But he was also one of the founding fathers of that field, even though he died before the field was formally established. So maybe before I talk about his specific contributions, let's talk about what artificial intelligence is. And even before we can do that, we have to talk about what intelligence is. And that's very difficult to come up with any definite answer or good definition what intelligence is. So I'm actually going to avoid that, but I know Kristinn will discuss this a little bit more in his talk. But basically, Turing also ran into this problem of trying to understand, basically, defining what intelligence is. And so he's quoting of having said that one might be tempted to define thinking as consisting of those mental processes that we don't understand. This is echoed by other very prominent AI researchers like Minsky, that says that intelligence is simply our name for whichever problem-solving mental processes we do not yet understand. And he actually liked this, liked intelligence to the concept of unexplored regions in Africa, meaning that once you discovered it, it doesn't exist anymore. And the same is a little bit with intelligence, things that we don't fully understand and we think we need some sort of intelligence to do. Once we start understanding the processes better, this kind of takes the magic out of it, and then we are kind of tempted not to consider it as an intelligent activity anymore. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at this. Like I said, Kristinn will discuss this a little bit more toward the end. But this means that And again, we run into similar problems. We try to define what artificial intelligence is. And the definition, I'm going to use an informal one here, and it's necessarily going to be somewhat vague because it has a reference to intelligence. And so for this talk at least, let's say that artificial intelligence is the science and engineering to make computer systems do things that require intelligence when done by humans. And computer systems, we also often call these, like, or nowadays, intelligent agents. And so this may typically, may or may not include the system's ability to sense its environment. And again, what is the environment of the system? And that depends on what kind of task you're doing. Naturally, if you're a robot acting in the physical world, you must be able to, actually, as we do, to understand the world around us. But you actually might be, the system might be just a program running on a Amazon web store or Google search engine, and it's really the environment that it must sense would then be what kind of a network stream is there or something like that. So this can be different depending on the task, what we mean by sensing an environment. But again, like, you need to sense the environment, reason about the information that you gain, your sensory input, preferably even learn from it. So once you're able to deduce or infer something, that you can actually build on that knowledge. You don't have to infer it every time, just as we do. And then based on this knowledge that you gained, act autonomously and sensibly toward achieving the goal, whatever the goal is. So again, this is necessarily somewhat vague, but this might give you some idea about what artificial intelligence is. And also, I'm going to provide a few examples which might even clarify this a little bit further. So the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about intelligence agents is our robots. And we have either like famous, either like toy robots, or actually could be more advanced robots. And we kind of typically like to, somehow this is the first comes to mind. But like I was saying, it doesn't necessarily have an intelligent agent, just have to be some kind of an embodiment of a human, or exist in the, like in, or be acting in our physical world. So other agents, I don't know how many of you remember this guy. It used to ship with every Windows computer. I don't know since when. It actually got very annoying and was removed. Agent Clippy. Again, this is not really like a robot, but it was supposed to be monitoring what you were doing and offer his help if the agent thought that you were having problems with some of the tasks you were supposed to do. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to be, again, trying to imitate humans in a way, and we can even push this definition to include like a control chip in a washing machine or a dryer. You could think of this as an intelligent agent, kind of depending what you're doing. So the sensory input would, let's say you're a control chip in a dryer, and your task is to try to make the drying process as efficient as possible. So you would need to have some sensory input to measure the heat, the temperature in the dryer, the humidity, and so on, and try to actually control the heat and the spinning so it's as efficient as possible. That would be how you would act in your the world. Of course, we are pushing the definition to this. Like, I think typically people will not consider this as an intelligent system, but there are, like in your car, when you are driving, you have an automatic transmission. And there's some work actually in these transmissions to actually try to adapt the transmission process to the way that you drive. So it's not behaving the same depending who is driving the car. So the car is kind of adapting to what you are doing. Again, we don't think of this as intelligence, but it takes certain intelligence to be able to do this. And so on. Like again, a program sitting on the Amazon web store monitoring what you're doing, deciding what kind of commercials should I show you, what kind of books should I suggest that you might be interested in, and so on. And actually the third way to try to gain some insight into what artificial intelligence is to look at the goals. So and there are different views what the goals of AI is. So we have, you could coarsely talk about three different views of AI or goals. And there is what is called like the applied AI view. So we are not really trying to build systems that have human-like intelligence necessarily. We are just trying to build smarter systems in a way. We want to automate more of the tasks that we as humans are doing, and we are building systems that do this in a little bit, makes us life a little bit better. We automate some tedious tasks and so on. These could be systems like a spam filter for email and so on. And then there's another view, or like this grand view of AI, where the holy grail is to try to create like a human-like intelligence. And this would be sometimes be named like the strong AI view. And the aim there is to build machines whose overall intellectual ability is indistinguishable from us, the humans. And this is a really, really big undertaking. And then you could also talk about the third view, which is related to the previous one, what we call the cognitive simulations view, is that we are building a computational models of how we work. But we are not doing that necessarily because we want to build agents that behave like us, but rather we want to build computational models to understand better how we work. And this might actually be a necessary condition for us to achieve the strong AI. But this has different goals. Like we're not doing this necessarily so we are able to actually build systems like that, but we want to understand how we work because this could help us live a better life, new medicine, or and so on. Okay, let's now turn to, now that we know somewhat what AI is, let's talk about Turing's contributions to AI. So he wrote a very similar paper, or actually it was a report in 1948, where he was one of the first questions to propose the question that was the title of this talk, Can Machines Think? So I'm going to spend some time today talk about this. Then he wrote also another similar paper in 1950 that was published in the journal Mind, named Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and this is actually the paper where he proposed the so-called Turing Test, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But also, at the very end of this article, he proposed chess as a one research avenue for us to start studying intelligence. And he wrote a paper on that in 1953. And this is actually in part why chess became such a, early on, an important test bed for AI research. Unfortunately, he died shortly after in 1954. And 2 years later, in 1956, there was this Dartmouth AI conference, which is considered to be, this has been used as the milestone, basically, where the birth of the field of AI, where like-minded people, the Turing came together and actually coined the terms artificial intelligence and actually became known as a field. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now is talk about his 1948 work, the intelligent machinery. And so he opened the paper by proposing, I propose to investigate the question as to whether it is possible for machinery to show intelligent behavior. And remember, at this time, computers were really just big calculators. So the first electronic computers had been around only for a couple of years, and we're really just doing numerical calculations. So this is actually a very thought-provoking question. And he actually continues by saying, it is usually assumed without argument that this is not possible. So for us, it might not be such a strange thought, but at that time, people were not thinking in those terms. And in the paper, he actually has reference to all these different views of AI that I was mentioning, even though they hadn't been really formally established or being discussed really. So he talks about possible applications of a machine that could think. And cryptography was one of those things, of course, close to his heart after working on the Enigma project. He also mentioned the possibility, like the strong view, he mentioned the possibility of robots roaming, like fully fledged human intelligence agents be roaming around the countryside. And this actually caused some hype at that time, and he was being criticized for talking about like machines that will be roaming the countryside, living off twigs and so on. And then finally, again, he was really inspired by the cognitive views. And in this paper, he actually proposed a computational model that was inspired by how he thought like that infants, like we humans or infants in particular, would learn. So he, in this paper, he introduces what is called unorganized machines, which is really basically just a collection of neurons that's going to randomly arrange. And he has two type of those, and he could actually introduce the way by combining them, like a learning mechanism into this. So he was one of the very first person to suggest that we would build a digital computer machines out of simplified neuron-like elements that will be connected in a network. And today we know this as artificial neural networks. And this is, like, the field doesn't yet exist, and he is already thinking about all these things. So let me talk about a little bit what artificial neural networks are. It's basically a computational model that is inspired by our brain. So our brain consists of billions, trillion neurons that are all connected together. And it's called, like, the connections are called synapses. And we have trillions and trillions of these connections. And so each neuron has some, you could say, input connections and output connection. And then they fire, depending on what their inputs are. They get some electrical and chemical signals based on the inputs, and depending on what kind of the input is, they actually may decide also to actually harass their neighboring neurons by sending signals there as well. And an artificial neural network is basically just a computational model that is trying to imitate this. So we have these artificial neurons that have digital inputs, and the output is some kind of function of the inputs, and then we connect a lot of these computational elements together typically in software to actually make a network. And then we can use this network to try to make some kind of inferences. For example, this example here is a neural network from NASA that they use to try to predict how plants will grow in space. So it has an input like the temperature, the light, the carbon dioxide, and nutrients, and so on, and then try to predict what the water intake, nutrition use, and so on is going to be. And this kind of seems like a natural, like especially if you're interested in strong AI, right? It seems kind of natural that we try to build intelligent machines that show intelligent human-like behavior, but are trying to imitate how we are. So he proposed, like, his network was really kind of along this line. Of course, his work was really early work, and it has evolved a lot since. And if you kind of look at the timeline, like in 1943, this is kind of considered like the first work where actually this computational model like this was suggested. The McCulloch and Pitt, and they actually introduced the neuron, but there was really no learning component to that we're doing. Turing actually was thinking about how you would learn, and he proposed a certain way of doing that, and he actually made a false argument there that just by making the arbitrary large and complex the network, so would the computability of expressiveness of the network grow as well. That was his conjecture there, which we know now to be false. And there's still work today being done in trying to fix Turing's model, to fix these drawbacks of his model. Okay, and then, yeah, so this was for you, and then it didn't really, like, really the neural network started to take off in computer science, and the AI was really when Rosenblatt introduced the perceptron, but this was like more than like a decade later.
Do you think he was reading Freud?
Excuse me?
Do you think he was reading Freud?
Oh, he was reading, I don't know. He was really a Renaissance man, so I would not be surprised. So the question was, do you think he was reading Freud? Okay, yeah, and actually there was a lot of hype about this. This computational model seemed very intuitive for how to build intelligent machines, because this is how we humans are. And so there was a lot of hype about this and active research until a book was published in 1969 by Minsky and Papert called Perceptron, where they really showed the limitations of this computational model. They showed that you can even a simple, very, very simple logical functions called XOR could not be computed with the perceptron. This kind of killed off research into neural networks for over a decade. This was actually only like a couple of years later. They actually had already there were papers fixing this problem, but this was so got so much attention that it really took more than a decade for research in neural network to catch really up again. And ever since, it's been one of the backbones in building learning systems. So let's look about what neural networks have done for the AI, and from the applied view, if we apply that, we've been doing, like, it's been really kind of robust and successful techniques in building all kinds of applications, although it's maybe not the most expressible system around, the neural networks. They still have the limitations. And they're used in many business and industrial applications, especially today. We have a lot of data we cannot handle, and we really need computers to try to make some sense out of the data that we have. And why do I show the camera here? So I'm sure most of you have been using the appliances using neural networks. It's a good chance if you have an automatic autofocus camera that the focus system in the camera is built on a neural network. So this is the applied view. It has a lot of impact. Of course, we cannot contribute this to Turing for the most part. It's just the point is basically that he was thinking about these things. He had these grand ideas that the computer had just existed for a couple of years, and were really just calculators, and he was already thinking about all these things. So what about the strong AI view? So before I go further into that, I want to introduce you to a very distinguished citizen of the scientific community. C. elegans played a key role in the research leading to the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine, not once, but twice, both in 2002 and 2006. Elegans has been to the International Space Stations, was research there being conducted on the muscular development in zero gravity. So who is this? Elegans? Well, for those that don't know, it's a roundworm, about 1 millimeter in length. It's a so-called model organism. That means it's an organism that has been chosen extensively to help us understand some biological processes. So it's been studied extensively for many decades. And why is it of interest to us here? It's one of the simplest organisms we know that still has a nervous system. And the nervous system has been fully mapped. So we basically know exactly how the brain looks like. So it consists of 302 neurons and about 7,000 connections. And these connections are connected as a small world network. It's a mathematical concept. This basically means that it's very sparsely connected, like each neuron is not connected to many others, but there are short paths between any two neurons in the network. It's fully known how the network is connected, but still there does not exist any complete computer model that can model the behavior of this worm. And it only has, like I said, like 300 neurons and 7,000 connections. And how does this compare to our human, remember? Our brain has trillions of neurons. In the cortex alone, about 30 billion. This is responsible for most of our intelligence. And we have so many connections that I think I've never said this word before even. Quadrillion. It's like 10 in the power of 15. And we are not able to model a live organism that has only like a billionth of a complexity that our brain is. So is this an argument against strong AI? Not necessarily, right? So it might be an argument against that this connectionist view, the neural network view of how we should try to achieve strong AI might actually be not as plausible the best way as maybe we initially thought. There's still a long way to go. But maybe it's not the right way to try to model our intelligence. So, and analogy is, of course, can machines fly? Yes, they can, but they are not doing it the same way as birds do. Okay, so so much for this first paper. Let's note, now 2 years passed in 1950, and he again published the second, but became a very similar paper. And again, he's very obsessed, still be thinking about if machine can think, and he is convinced about that, but he is now thinking, okay, what do you mean by think? And again, we are still debating what this means, but he was saying, well, how do we know then? Like as a true scientist, how do we know if we achieved our goal? Can we build systems that can think? Can we build systems that show human-like intelligence? How can I tell? How do I know? And so he conceived a test, actually to test for that if this goal has been achieved. And this is what he called the imitation game, but it's now better known as the Turing Test. So roughly speaking, how does it work? So you have two persons on one computer in separate rooms, and they communicate through a console, the internet today. The task of the interrogator can ask both parties all kinds of questions. Whatever question comes to mind, and the task of the interrogator is to try to figure out which of the other two is the computer and which is the human. And the human is supposed to behave as normally, should not be trying to make the life in particular difficult for the interrogator, but the computer should use any means it can to be able trying to get the interrogator to believe it's a human. So this means the computer might have to answer things wrong. It would ask it to multiply two big numbers. Probably if it would come up with an answer like this, I would give it away that I'm a computer. And then you would actually do this with a set of many different humans, different interrogators on different humans, and then you would have some statistical test in end to see if the interrogator has a way of statistically significantly distinguish these two. And if it cannot, you would say that this thinking machine would have passed the Turing test. There has been a lot of criticism about this test, and Kristinn will actually add something to that later, that this is not a true test of machine intelligence. And the criticism goes kind of in two ways. Like, one is that there can be machines that would be considered intelligent, but they would never pass this test because they are not meant to. You can have a robot working in a mine autonomously. It's actually fine figuring out where to look for the gold. It can escape if something dangerous is going on. It's just acting what you could consider to be in an intelligent way. But this kind of a criticism on the test is really misguided, because it was never meant to be actually a test for what is intelligence. And actually, Turing specifically acknowledges that. But the other kind of criticism is actually is more valid, and that's saying like that you could have machines that are not intelligent. Again, depending on what we mean by intelligence, but we would not consider to be intelligent. They could nonetheless pass the test. And the Chinese room objection is probably the most famous of this criticism. It's saying, okay, you have this computer, it looks very intelligent, you give it some questions and they give you the right answers. And so the Chinese room objection goes something like this. Okay, you have a question, it's in Chinese, you give it to the computer, inside the computer there's a human, or actually he also, the philosopher that actually he came with this objection also considered that if you would have a neural network, he was saying, okay, you would have one human there simulating each neuron, and that's really, and in either case, and if you just had one human there, and the human, just as the computer, will just be following a recipe, and we don't consider that to be much of an intelligence. And again, the human would then be able to actually not know anything what is going on. It just sees some simple science it doesn't understand. It follows some well-defined process and gets some answer back. It gives it to returns it, and the argument of the Chinese room is something along the line that, okay, because these humans were not doing anything intelligent, like the system cannot be doing anything intelligent. And kind of the counter-arguments actually, like, I think most people don't think this really as take this criticism very seriously. And one of the counter-arguments goes something like that. Okay, even the one component of the system, it was the human, the system is much more just on the human that is following the instructions, like the instructions and everything. Even though one component of the system is not intelligent, doesn't mean that the system itself can not be intelligent. And again, a similar argument was about table lookups. In theory, at least, it's perceivable that we can anticipate any questions, possible questions, and have all the answers ready, and we just look it up in the table. Is that intelligence? Chomsky, Chomsky has also put some, added to this argument, said that this is really, we should not be arguing about this at all. It's just fruitless, because it's not about about facts. It's really just about decision, whether we decide is intelligent or not. But anyways, you can just return again to this picture here. Can machines fly? And this goes back to what is intelligence. Is it about the behavior that we show, or does it matter how we came to do this behavior? And this is again, it doesn't have a clear answer. There is a competition held annually, Loebner Prize competition. It is for competition. It's a competition for conversational computer programs where we are basically doing this Turing test. It was established in 1990. There's $100,000 prize and a gold medal for the first computer to pass the Turing test. And because we're still so far off, I think no one is really tempted by this $100,000 prize. But there's a $2,000 prize for whoever comes up with the best entry each year. This year is going to actually, the competition is going to be hosted at Bletchley Park in honor of Turing, but that's where he was when he was working on the Enigma project. And the prize fund has been tripled. A person called David Levy will be the local organizer. He is actually a famous computer chess pioneer. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But he has also written about the evolution of human and robot relationships. And he's recently published a book named like Love and Sex with Robots, something along those lines. And this was actually, he was awarded a PhD for this work. So this is serious stuff. I was going to take it with me here, but forgot. Again, you can know more about this competition following this link here. And okay, so much about, that's all I'm going to say about this. And again, this will be revisited by Kristinn. And the last, in the conclusions of his 1950 paper, he proposed chess. That might be one of the interesting avenue to continue studying intelligent system, because at that time, at the very least, like it was considered to play chess well, you needed a lot of kind of human-like intelligence, including like reasoning, logical thinking. There was creativity, intuition, and so on.
So young collective mind. Young collective mind.
Yes. Yeah. So, anyways, so this was he, and he actually followed up on this. And in 1953, he actually published a paper on chess. It's not that this paper became as similar as the other papers, but he was the first person to build an algorithm capable of playing chess. So even during the war years, he was using references to chess to kind of illustrate his ideas about intelligent machines. And there are some thoughts dating back to 1944 on this, but he built a program in 47, 48, he designed a program called TurboChamp that could play chess. He didn't have a computer, he didn't program it, he didn't have a computer to run it on. He had an algorithm for doing this. And this is the first computer chess game ever played. In 1951, this program played against a human, a game of chess, and Alan Turing hand simulated, basically, he traced the algorithm to decide what the move was. The move was only, the game was only 29 moves, but it took 3 hours. And it's not that this opponent was thinking. The computer the program was running on was slow. Okay, so, and let's look again at the computer chess timeline. Again, Turing, one of the pioneers here, was a similar paper actually came out in 1950. It was introduced first in 1949 at a conference by Claude Shannon, which is also a big name in computer science, father of information theory. From 1947 to 51, Turing designed the first program to play chess. Published the paper in 53. 54 and through the 60s, we had the early era of chess programs, very selective program, trying to imitate how we humans play chess, very selective, trying to figure out only a couple of plausible moves to consider, and so on. Los Alamos was actually played a reduced game of chess. Other famous program, Greenblatt, MIT, and SS, Carnegie Mellon. These are actually 2 Nobel Prize winners. One of the N and S, these are 2 Nobel Prize winners. And it's not worms, it's actually a person. Herb Simon and Newell. But progress was slow. So they were saying, okay, let's first study chess, before we take on the grand challenge. Let's start with something simple. Give us 10 years to figure out how to play chess. Cannot be that difficult. Progress was slow. And this actually caused this aforementioned David Levy, who was actually the organizer now host for the Turing Test this year, actually to place the bet. He said, within 10 years, there will still be no computer around that can beat me in the game of chess. And at that time, the computers were still, they were actually getting better and better every year. So there were many people that, so he posed this bet originally with John McCarthy, again, and Donald Mickey, both very famous pioneers of AI. And they were very willing to take the bet, and it was like about 250 pounds each, I think. And at that time, annual salary was maybe 1,000 British pounds. Like David Levy is Scottish or British, so this was in pounds. And another guy that we already heard about, Simon Papert, who the one who published this paper about that a neural net, like the perceptron cannot learn, that Papert, he begged to get in on the bet, and he got into the bet a year later. They were going to make easy money. Actually, he played, at that time, David Levy was on the edge of becoming an international master. He was not even a grandmaster. But then soon after he became an international master, and they actually played a match against, So maybe, then we actually, the first World Computer Chess Championship was in '74, and this kind of, course, is maybe considered the start of the new era of modern chess programs, where we stopped trying to imitate how humans play chess. We were doing actually more brute force approaches. And this chess, there was a program for Northwestern University called Chess, initially Chess 3-something, and then Chess 4, and so on. I think it was version Chess 4.7 that played a match against David Levy in 78, 10 years later, and it lost the match badly. So the humans were still winning, but still, the AI researchers were still saying, okay, give us 10 more years, 10 more years, 10 more years. And it was not until I forgot there's one milestone here. In 1989, the bet was 68, over 30 years later, actually a computer finally did win the much more older, not active chess playing David Levy. 30 years later. And then, but there was a great big milestone when the chess program Deep Blue won Kasparov in '97. And Kasparov actually was not the world champion at that time. He had lost his title the year earlier. They played another match in 1996 that Kasparov won. Then Kasparov was the world champion, but in the meantime, Kasparov had lost his title to Kramnik. But he was still the highest rated chess player in history. And at that time, he was still considered the best chess player. And nowadays, even on a PC, we have superhuman chess programs. Actually, chess programs are now then played against, not the strongest chess players, the grandmasters, but just a regular grandmaster. They typically give them a pawn spot when they play, like when we are playing against someone, a beginner. So, what does this tell us? Let's look at this computer chess, what we have achieved. And let's look at this again from the strong AI view and the applied AI view. So in 1965, Crontrott said that the chess is the Drosophila of AI, meaning it's a fruit fly. The fruit fly is really important for genetics because it has a very short lifespan, and so we can get very quickly many generations. It's even more important than C. elegans. So, and again, not all researchers were happy, actually, even though finally we were reaching the level we were winning humans. Really, when they looked back, they said, well, what did we learn during this long journey? And some people would mean that we didn't learn very much, and there's a famous quote by, again, John McCarthy, who's the author of Lisp, among other things, is that computer chess has developed much as genetics might have if the geneticists had concentrated their effort starting in 1910 on breeding racing fruit flies. We would have some science, but mostly very fast fruit flies. Okay, so this is the strong AI view. And actually also kind of became true, maybe we overrated a little bit the importance of intuition and the creativity and how we should play chess. Maybe we overestimated our human intelligence a little bit. The applied view, however, there's a lot of research. Of course, we have commercial chess program. Of course, that's not a big industry, especially today. No one wants to play against them anymore. You lose all the time. But there's all kinds of methods that came out of this, algorithms that are very helpful, and basically have changed the way how we solve many problems today. Just as linear programming was a revolutionary for solving many problems, when we could have computers to solve things, we started to think about problems differently. We were not necessarily always building analytical models. And the same has been like a state-based search method that searched millions and millions of possibilities is becoming a standard way of solving many very important problems in autonomous planning, SAT solving, and so on. Also, machine learning was popularized in games and something like called retrograde analysis when we try to solve perfectly things and so on. So again, it depends how we look at it, but I'm going to finish this with what I want to name the chess Turing test, just to tie together what we're talking about. So this position did arise in the deep blue, the second deep blue Kasparov match. That the one that was played in 97, the deep blue won. This is the second game, deep blue lost the first game, and they are playing the second game now. The computer that is white has the move, and the computer has the option of trying to infiltrate white position here and win a pawn. And this is something that computers typically did at that time. They're very materialistic. Grab material if you can. The computer, but again, even though black will lose a pawn because the opponent bishop's opponent color, black has some drawing chances actually playing on the black squares. But unfortunately, the black bishop is very badly positioned, basically behind the black pawn chain. The computer didn't actually go after the pawn. The computer played the bishop to e4. And the idea here was to block the pawn here so black could not open for the bishop. This is like a prophylactic move, basically making sure the opponent has no counter chances. After the game, Kasparov, because of this move, accused IBM of cheating. There's no way a computer would have played this move. There must be a human in the loop. So Kasparov, the best chess player of all time, was unable to distinguish between whether he was playing against a human or a computer. Today's computer routinely would play this game, play this move. So no one suspects cheating anymore. Well, no one did. Well, very few did. Okay, so again, to conclude, can machines fly? Yeah, yes, we already figured that out. Can they think? Yes. Are we likely to achieve strong AI anytime soon? That's questionable.
10 more years.
10 more years, yeah, in 10 years. Good guess. So thank you very much.
So hi, everyone. My name is Kristinn Thórisson, and I will be the grumpy old man today because I will be criticizing Turing, a very brilliant man, but maybe a bit overhyped, or at least let's see if I can convince you of that. So what I will be talking about is the following. First, we have to ask a very simple question. What is intelligence? Well, as Yngvi pointed out, it's not necessarily clear to everyone what it is. But I definitely disagree with Minsky that it's like the unexplored areas of Africa. Because it's very simple for us to imagine or to conjure up, even with our eyes closed, very good examples of intelligent systems. It just happens to be a bit troublesome for us to break it down, and I will show you what I mean by that. So let's just start by listing some things that we might all agree on counts towards intelligence. Well, it's knowing what, it's knowing how to, it's essentially knowing things, internalized information of sorts, and then being able to access this in various ways, associatively, through vision and hearing, symbolically, via language, being able to use it for various purposes, being able to get a promotion, or buy a cheap salad, or drive a car, or win at Jeopardy. Now, intelligence is commonly explained as the ability to do X, where X is, for example, play chess, vacuum the floor, drive a car through the desert, or in Turing's case, do instant messaging. This has a deep problem, and that is that it ignores the ability to learn. And I think most of you would agree that being able to learn is really an important part of intelligent systems, at least all of the ones we know from nature, and that's where we got the idea for artificial intelligence anyway. So some things that matter in learning: speed of learning, retention of what is learned, the ability to apply what has been learned to various things, the ability to learn from a variety of sources. Of course, this is all important. Anyone who can do more, or rather than less of these, is going to be more intelligent than whoever else who doesn't do that. So let's say, let's look at this now. In fact, there is a movement now in AI that really is trying to incorporate learning in a much broader sense than has been before. And of course, Turing talked about that, but not a lot. So let's say we have a new version of common understanding of intelligence, which is the ability to learn and perform X, where X is, again, playing chess, or vacuuming the floor, or driving a car through the desert, or doing instant messaging. But unfortunately, this also has a severe shortcoming. Because it's not just learning and doing X, where X is one of those things. It's the ability to learn a variety of things. And along with that, the ability to transfer learning from one thing to the other, even though it's not necessarily obviously related. Balancing all sorts of tasks and goals. Managing mental resources using intention. And making plans, taking opportunities, etc. In time, over long periods of time, within short periods of time, etc. And then meta-learning, learning to learn. Where's that? So, intelligence is really all of the above, but it's actually more than that, because not only do intelligent systems know a variety of things, have a variety of skills using a variety of means and a variety of sensors, they also can learn a variety of facts and a variety of things through a variety of means using various sensors. And they can turn skills into facts and facts into skills and generalize from experience, anticipate the future, draw useful analogies between seemingly completely unrelated things. Aren't these part of intelligence? I think we forgot that, or at least some of the people in our field of AI. And most interestingly, perhaps, they can learn about themselves. So let's see. Here's the list we've gone through so far. If we assume that intelligent systems that we might want to build for practical purposes, or intelligent systems that we might want to build to use to understand what natural intelligence is, then the list should be at least this long, in my opinion. And I want to focus your attention on the top part here. Knowing what and knowing how to. Even this, without the learning and all of the other stuff I mentioned, it includes a lot of stuff. Driving, traveling, writing, talking, singing, skating, skiing, changing light bulbs, lying, swimming, drawing, coding, gardening, spying, dressing, crying, assembling IKEA furniture, and the list goes on. It's a very long list, in fact. Now, if we take those two, writing and talking, which is what goes into instant messaging, and we look at this in light of this list, which obviously is much longer than what I listed. In fact, it might be this long. The Turing test is looking at that dot. And this has a very bad side effect. The fact that the dot is so small, it leads people to something that I call constructionist AI, where the programmer is a construction worker. And the construction worker is, in fact, trying to solve that little dot there. He's trying to build that little dot by hand. And if we have something as complex as intelligence, I think of it much more as an ecology than a chessboard. And you contrast that with the tools of building by hand. You realize this is not a really good match. If, in fact, intelligence is very complicated, sort of like a small piece of a forest, even if you switch out the tool with a bigger tool chest, the match seems just ridiculous. So, intelligence is a lot of things. And it's the combination that really brings out the magic. If we try to remove any of its features, it stops being intelligence and becomes kind of a tiny little fraction of intelligence. And frankly, intelligence in nature, we really don't understand a lot of it. And to understand it, we can't use the traditional divide and conquer, at least not blindly. We can't really chop down intelligence and say, we'll only study a tiny part of it. And that's the problem. So the Turing test, in fact, in my opinion, was a very early and very premature attempt at constructing a test for the phenomenon of natural intelligence. It forces upon us this model. Intelligence is X, where X is so simple that we're tempted to build it by hand. And this leads to pathetic parodies of some limited skills of what we see in natural intelligences, i.e. language and dialogue. So, thank you very much.
So thanks to both Kristinn and Yngvi for their contributions. Well, I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. You can address your questions to either of them, both of them. Okay, so I guess we need a volunteer for asking questions, and I'm known for being a volunteer. Okay, Hannes.
I can ask a question I know that Chris has the answer for. I mean, do we have hope?
Can you repeat the question so maybe you can? Yeah, please. So we record
or should we stop trying?
So the question is there hope or should we stop trying? Yes, there's hope. But right now, I think the efforts of scientists around the world who are really focusing on the subject of AI needs to be guided in a better way towards the big picture, because I really think that we have something of a phenomenon like a car engine. It's a Martian car engine, and we're trying to tear it apart, but studying only the exhaust system or the fan is not going to get us a system that brings us from A to B like a car engine is supposed to do. So yes, there is hope, but I don't think some people have hope that if we study the pieces, piece by piece, then we'll be able to put it all together, and boom, we'll have AI, really AI, and even strong AI. And I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't, unless I am vastly overestimating the complexity of how the whole works in intelligence. But I don't think there's no evidence of that putting the pieces together is simple and that the pieces are complex. It's in fact both. So it's very hard to study an ecosystem or a society by simply studying City Hall.
Yes, so maybe I also answer this. So do we have hope? I guess you're talking about like accomplishing strong AI, right? So I think it's right what Kristinn is saying, that we are not making much progress towards that goal, and maybe we are not using the right tools for doing that. But this comes a little bit back to this question versus this applied versus strong AI. Like, we are not necessarily as a field trying to accomplish strong AI, right? We are doing a lot of useful things. But again, when it comes to strong AI, it's we are not making much progress. But I'm still a big fan of that we're trying to solve small problems before we start to solve like big problems. But again, we can still try to accomplish, like we could try to simulate complete life forms, like like the roundworm, right? So it's a complex picture, right? But if we don't even have hope of doing that well, how can we ever think that we can do it with the humans? And again, but like Kristinn is saying, like the applied view is so strong, and of course, because it has a lot of useful benefits for us, that there are not many people around that are actually actively working on accomplishing strong AI. But my view is, let's try to do it with a simple life before we try to start accomplish human-like intelligence.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about what about things like consciousness? How can you ever believe that a machine will be conscious? I don't even know if you are conscious.
Okay, so the question is, what about consciousness? How can we think that a machine could be conscious when we're not even sure that anyone besides ourselves is conscious? Of course, we're sure that we are. We have to dissect that question. Part of that question may have to do with the issue of is consciousness as each individual human experiences it necessary for intelligence? Another is, do we think that we ever are able to bring something like what we experience as consciousness into a machine? And even further dissecting that, consciousness has at least 30 different meanings, that term. So if we take, for example, the typical, or one of the more traditional uses of the term, it means knowing, being aware of your surroundings, of your body, of events, etc. And being aware is about information. And as computer scientists, I'm sure a lot of people agree that you don't necessarily need subjective consciousness, like what it is like to be a human being, for information processing. If you need some information to make a decision of some sort, that could be called to be aware of something, but there's no perhaps conscious experience that follows. Well, I'll leave it at that. It's another talk.
Yeah. And my answer is, like, does it matter? Yeah. No, really.
Well, you have to answer that.
Okay, so
one question. It's about the chess match between Kasparov and Yngvi. My question is, the previous software was very materialistic, so something must have happened that made it more intelligent. And has the company told or disclosed what it was made more intelligent?
Yeah. So the question was regarding the chess matches between Deep Blue and Kasparov. Like the computer improved greatly between and actually improved on previous software or previous chess computers. And the question was, what was it that made it so much more intelligent the next year, or more intelligent than the previous software? But, yeah. So there was really no magic. It's pure engineering. It was much better tuned. It was a complex system. They it was really engineering, and they had also more time. And again, like Deep Blue has been criticized for that. This was so much engineering. It was running on many computers. It used more processors, and it used actually all the knowledge in there was hand coded. It didn't learn. It learned very little. They used some learning to tune different parameters. And they had actually a grandmasters consulting the project, actually to build in the chess knowledge. And in this case, it just had a knowledge about that if you had opposite color bishops, that there were some drawing chances, and just try to keep the other bishop passive. It was just a matter you had the right knowledge. But it was not learned, it was programmed in there.
I will add to that that Kasparov made a very interesting comment on that match, where he said, commenting on the depth to which Deep Blue could actually compute or predict moves, that he said quantity has become quality. That in fact, while Deep Blue was doing exactly the same or using the same methodologies as all the other chess programs before it, suddenly some threshold was reached and the quality had changed just by speeding up, in fact, the computations. And I always think that's a very interesting insight.
But maybe let me add a little bit to that. So, but this is a way we solve many problems today, and but I find it amazing that we humans are so good at playing chess. Like the computer is looking at millions and millions of possibilities, where the humans is maybe analyzing hundreds chess positions for each move decision. I find it amazing that we humans are so good at playing chess, and we don't fully understand, and we've not been able to replicate that. We don't understand the thought model enough. And I think if we could also add this to computers, in top of this, think about that we have this meta capacity that we have in deciding what is important and what is not important. And we will add to that like a million-fold possibilities we can look at. We could accomplish so many more things, and then I think we will see like a true intelligence. But this is also why it's so important to study how we work, because we are still very good at things that computers still suck at. Like image processing is one of those things.
Yeah, my question was basically answered. It was about the specific move and the comment that Kasparov made about the intuition. Okay. Image.
Yeah, let me be a grumpy young guy. It's a question for Kristinn, so regarding the criticism of the Turing test. So my question to you is, if we expand the Turing test to move away from like CAD programs and do all this cooking and lying and all this stuff, will Stephen Hawking pass your Turing test?
Easily.
What?
Obviously.
Well, I mean, the thing is that essentially what he's able to do is chat with the world, communicate with the world. And that's about it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, that particular argument has to do with the fact that it isn't so hard, it turns out, to cheat, to in fact write a program that pretends to be capable of that. But to be truly capable of that, obviously, none of the programs that pass the Loebner Prize, that compete in the Loebner Prize today, can even write a small summary of today's events, not to mention, a brief history of time. So, okay, I'll give you that. If it produces a brief history of time, then I'll rest my case.
I'm not sure that many of the things that Kristinn was mentioning, that the Turing test is really excluding that as intelligence. Like, of course, you as an interrogator, you could actually start presenting the system with new, like the other person with new facts, and then ask questions to see if you were able to learn something from those facts, right? So it's still very open-ended in that respect. But this Loebner Prize is, if you look at the entries there, like definitely could be criticized. I remember, like in the first years, the best way to disguise yourself as a human, and that was actually the cheap trick that the computer system Winning used, was to introduce spelling errors. Deliberately. This was in the early years though, but this was the level of winning.
Any more questions?
That might not work today though.
Yeah, if you manage to artificially make the human mind, would it likely come with all the drawbacks of the human mind? Like you probably don't want your self-driving car to have alternative motives and such.
I guess it just depends what you're trying to. The question is like, if we were able to reproduce the mind, would it still have the same drawbacks that we have? Well, I guess it depends what we are trying to model. If that's what we want to model, and if we are successful at it, yes, it will and should.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think actually some of the things that humans do, there aren't that many ways to implement that in any way, in any kind of medium. And so some of the more advanced things that we have evolved to be able to do that have drawbacks will also have drawbacks no matter how we implement it in a machine, in an artificial medium. But practically speaking, I think, if we had the ability to do human intelligence or superhuman intelligence in a computer, we would probably still very seldom, if ever, want it running completely, because we would always find a particular use of it, and then we could just cut out, for example, if we made an artificial scientist, it wouldn't have to go to the bathroom like I do. There's a bunch of stuff that you could just cut out, and so we would target it, practically we would target it. But I think theoretically the question is a good one. And I suspect there are some things that would have the same drawback or similar drawbacks, because that's just the nature of the methods, of the best methods of doing some of these things.
Yeah, well, it just came to my mind like the chess analogy. So humans will make mistakes, and I think this is one advantage of chess programs. They don't make like silly mistakes. They might make mistakes, like long-term mistakes, because they don't see the long-term consequences, but they don't make a one or two move blunder that humans do. So even though you have two equally strong players, just because the human has non-zero chance of making silly mistakes, the computer is always going to win, like in a long match. And there is actually an example that the world champion made a one-move blunder against a deep, like bridge chess program, just allowed the immediate mate in actually in competitive settings.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can take further questions offline. And thank again Yngvi and Kristinn for a very thought-provoking, as it should be, presentation.